Well, thanks guys for coming. I'm really surprised to see you here in so big numbers because I would myself go to the other presentation of Ceph, but thank you. A couple of words about me. My name is Andrzej Grzesik. I work at eBay in London. I have a Twitter, I have an email, I have a blog. If you'd like to talk to me, please do it after the session. The longer we wait, the less fun it will be. Some things I'm involved with, some things that you might know me from is Polish Java User Group, a conference called Geekon, Software Craftsmanship Kraków, and Kraków Hadoop User Group. Of course, we have to start with a motivational slide. People in my workplace are not really fond of me using it everywhere, but I still love it. So I hope you do too. A couple of disclaimers. My opinions are my own. I'm not representing any companies in particular. Any resemblance to anything that has happened or you might know of is just purely coincidental. I'm just talking about abstract stories, not attached to any companies, just to be safe. And sometimes I do say I hate computers. If you have questions, just raise your hand, somebody will approach you, or you can try screaming and I'll try to repeat the question. Do it as soon as you have it. It will work much better this way. And now, who is a fan of Star Wars here? Couple of hands. Are you really hardcore fans of Star Wars and you will hate me if I twist anything about it? No. No. Good. Good. Happy to hear that. So, we'll start with, well, the talk will be in a bit Star Wars convention. There are a couple of episodes. This is about what I have seen and observed and sometimes participated in hypothetical companies, remember, about and around CI. So things that can happen, usually do happen. What are the good sides, what are the bad sides? And because in my current hypothetical place that I could work in, yeah, I think I'll drop the act. We've gone through some interesting challenges, and I think, well, I can share the story with you. So it's not about how to build it, it's about what we did, what worked, what didn't. I can offer some tips, but it's mostly a case study or a journey through history. Episode 1, well, the new Jenkins. We just happen to use Jenkins. I just happen to do Jenkins. It starts with a new department of a company. It started two and something years ago in London. Of course, what happens? You have new department. You have new developers. First, we need a CI. What happens first? Well, somebody will do an ad hoc manual installation of Jenkins because you need something to run the code. What happened? Somebody used their development desktop as a CI, which is a good idea if you really don't need it anymore. On the other hand, because that was a development box that somebody used and somebody managed, soon magic and mysticism started to creep in. Because it's somebody box, so only that person would be the person touching it, configuring, and that led to problems, that led to pain. On a scale of 1 to 11, I would give it a 1 out of 11, because don't do it unless you work in a very small team and this is only a temporary thing. If you have a large or large-ish thing, putting CI infrastructure onto development boxes that run inside your office, not a great idea. Because of course cables can be, well, ripped out, and somebody can water the plants and the computer. Yes, it did happen, and it was an expensive plant. No new CPUs grew. Don't do it. That's, well, end of episode 1. Let's move to something more interesting, which I call node wars. Why node wars? Because I told you, well, machines break. We all know that. To us, well, machines break all the time. And you just have to deal with that because that's how computers are made. So if your CI broke, surprise, you had to fix them. Which means we eventually get to have more nodes. Which means if we have more nodes, we have to repeat the work. The solution was, of course, easy. What we did was we just used Chef. We started cheffing our machines that worked reasonably well. The caveat was that people that started to write Chef were developers, Java developers who some of them have never done any Linux. It was an interesting experiment. On the other hand, after 2 and something years, the experiment is still going on. We have a set of cookbooks that we do use. And from hindsight, I can tell you that in this hypothetical company, it was a good choice. Chef helped us a lot. Chef helped with repeatability. Once people started to experiment because they could repeat, if they broke something, they could just redo everything from scratch. That worked well. Of course, the more people did that, the more builds they created, the more you had to wait. The solution was, again, ask this gentleman to fix our things, just create more machines, start creating nodes. And soon we had a lot of nodes. Some of them were not really necessary, but if people do things and if they are using slightly too many machines, and it's our data centers, not somebody else that we have to pay for, okay, I call it a small price to pay, or not such a huge price to pay, because still we're talking about department of around 70 people here. So them using a couple more machines that's actually needed, not so bad, but they actually could work. They did experiment, they did automate, and they did do a lot of stuff that otherwise they wouldn't. So to me, it's a win. And now a quick poll: who here is a developer? Who here is doing something, I don't know, do you even have somebody who manages Jenkins in your organizations? Yeah, okay, because, well, in places I have witnessed, usually it's developers taking care of that, so I'm just curious what your approach is. So my stories are from places in which developers do that. Jenkins is considered, well, something dev, and it's just a tool that you would spin up if you need it, when you need it, and kill it if you need it. Of course, there is a central platform team that provides a hosted Jenkins experience if you don't want to do that, if you want to rely on theirs. But that is something that we couldn't use. Simply because, first of all, it's a walled garden. Somebody configures that, so there is a blessed set of plugins that has to be used, and there is nothing else available, and you can't click install because you don't have any permissions. You can just enter your GitHub URL, and they will take care of the rest. So if you have any non-standard build, which in a large organization is not really hard to have, because if you have a large internet company, you get all kinds of technology in there. So to us, we had to do our own CIs. And that was a no-brainer. That wasn't even a question. We tried using the provided platform as a service solution. Ultimately, it didn't work too well. Moving on, episode 3, Revenge of the VMs, or because Windows. As you know, reality likes to strike. Reality really likes to bite and sometimes kick. What I mean by that is sometimes you have to work with certain software that you don't like. For me, that piece of software is WebSphere. However, I don't work with WebSphere. Actually, ask all the companies I would consider working for, do I have to work with WebSphere? If the answer is yes, I will say, I am not interested, thank you very much. And I try to do it in writing, so if they then, would you do some WebSphere? No. Here, I have this paper bit. So there is certain software that doesn't really like automation. Let's call it, let's say DB2 on a specific installation, let's say WebSphere Commerce that other people have to deal with. That doesn't like automation. That doesn't like being chefed. I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, well, there are people that I work with that would be very interested to know your stories. What we did there was we took the path of least resistance. We can try to automate it and spend time and drive ourselves crazy in trying to understand how the software can be automated, or we did the simplest, what seemed like the simplest thing. We did a VM, stored the image in a very safe place, in a couple of copies, and then, well, use it as needed, and then deal with the problem and basically run away. That meant that we didn't spend too much time, so this piece wasn't automated. Windows wasn't automated. Getting Windows licensing in our org, using VMs wasn't so easy because you had to use VMs from a trusted source. So we have just requested a bunch of them and used only a couple, and when they broke, we just moved on to a different set of images. Yes, you can call it a poor man's solution, but that's what we did. That worked reasonably well because it meant that you didn't have to waste time doing and repeating things over and over. Also, what happened? We did have chefed Jenkins when we had chefed nodes. Java developers at that time, at that point in time, already felt reasonably confident with Chef. They felt safe enough to change it on their own. One note here, we did use Chef Solo because we didn't want errors or bugs to propagate and automatically kill everything else we had. So that was still Chef Solo driven, which is a bit manual, but in our world worked perfectly fine. Sometimes some people were a bit too aggressive in their automation attempts, and they were trying to chef and drive Jenkins configuration, so jobs and everything with that. That didn't work. That was more pain than it's worth. There are a couple of ways to do it. To us, Jenkins configuration, well, the basic XML, yes, you can provide that. The rest, clicking worked so much better. Very important thing that we had to explore was different backup solutions. For us, what turned out to be the best is just storing build configuration. So how your jobs are organized and how your jobs are running. There is a plugin that effectively stores it to a Git repository. We used that. We were very happy with the solution. We tried different approaches, but they didn't work that well. And the plugin, which I don't remember the name of, but whenever it works in a way that whenever you change something in a job config, it will commit and push immediately to your internal GitHub or to, well, any GitHub that you provide. And it's awesome for, again, for experimentation, for restoring Jenkins, because you spin up a Jenkins, ask it to restore, done. Because we had more builds, because we had more nodes, we had to start implementing, well, some way of knowing if the machines are still working. We started with Ganglia, which provided nice graphs. Yeah, that was awesome. Then we started doing Isinga, so to get some information when something broke. The approach with here was we don't fix machines. If a machine breaks down, okay, that's an unlucky machine. We don't like unlucky machines. We don't want to work with unlucky machines because the bad luck might transfer to us. We'll kill it. We'll just spin up another one. Because we had it chefed, that wasn't the problem. It was about 10 minutes end-to-end to kill, well, to see that you want to kill a node. Well, just kill it, create another one, chef it, all worked. That was good. And we didn't spend, well, too much time because, of course, like I'm talking here about CI, but we were building systems and we were building some software. That's just, well, a side effect. What spawned out of here was we were part of a larger org that has a couple of sub-corporations or some similar organizations inside its Inc. umbrella. And that idea was something that we actually could sell to other organizations because people have to deal with configuring CIs everywhere. And there were different approaches available. And that was something that we could actually share internally. We were trying, and we are still trying to open source some of the efforts, but the legal team is just too slow. Them reviewing chef cookbooks, I can understand that you feel my pain here. Anyway, Chef Solo-driven Jenkins, Chef Solo-driven nodes, reasonable start, especially now that, well, there is a lot of chef cookbooks that just work available, so it means that you don't have to write them yourselves. That's something that you can, if you want to start, that's a good default. If you want to take your DevBox Jenkins to somewhere, that's a good thing. And because we were so good, we had to introduce a problem to ourselves: mobile. Mobile is very important, at least that's what they keep repeating in the company I work for. What it meant is that we need to do some mobile testing. If you've heard of Selenium, which is an automated way of testing websites, there is something that's called an iOS Selenium driver that allows you to test Android and, sorry, iOS Selenium driver is something that allows you to test iPhone applications with Selenium. And there is a similar driver that's called Selendroid. That was the tool chain that we had to put into our CI solution. And yes, the funny thing is, well, first funny thing is that everybody uses Mac Minis for that. The explanation is very simple. Legally, you're only allowed to run OS X VMs on Apple hardware. So that's what you do. And because you're only, again, by license allowed to run 2 VMs on a specific piece of hardware, then you choose the hardware that gives you the best bang for the buck, which in everybody's case turns out to be Mac Minis. So in one of our collocations, we have a nice shelf with a lot of Mac Minis. And that seems to be what everybody else does as well. So that's pretty standard. How we did approach that problem was because we weren't the primary users. We weren't the target audience for testing mobile. Mobile testing team was something completely different to us. I happened to work with one of the authors of iOS Selenium driver here. So we had 64 OS X VMs at first. We decided to go Chef server here because this is something that we are not supposed to touch. This is something that we don't want to touch, and repeatedly change. Also because all the hardware, all of the VMs are exactly the same, which means that's just have everything everywhere in the same way. One caveat: OS X is a bit of a pain. If you try, when we tried to automate installations of, let's say, Xcode or Selenium onto OS X, it turned out some of the machines could randomly fail, just like that. What we did was we captured Chef client's output. We collected it with Logstash. If a machine was producing too many errors, that was a VM. Kill the VM, start from scratch until it stops. That turned out to be a very good solution also because some of the VMs at random moments, they would just freeze, they would misbehave, they would do something, they would go haywire. We didn't explore why because it was, let's say, a machine per week, but it still did happen. And we used VMware because we could get a vSphere license easily, and so you can install VMware on barebone OS X. Sorry, on barebone Apple hardware, and then you can have VMs running in there. We did it because APIs, and that turned out to be a very good solution. We are very happy with that. Now, OS X, as I told you, is full of quirks, which meant some of the time that we had to invest in here was put and had to be put into automating OS X and having it repeatedly run. You have no idea what problems happen when you are trying to install something onto an OS X instance that has, for example, French keyboard layout set. It's just unbelievable. So once we had it, we were unfortunately still having a bit too many scripts running inside our chefs, but it worked. And our primary need was to be able to restore a node to a particular version of Java and of Xcode when it fails. And as far as I know, this solution is still being used. It still works. So the setup we stopped working on half a year ago is still good. So if you need any hints, I'll be very happy to speak about that. The cookbooks for that also, we tried to open source them, and then the organization I am still part of had a round of layoffs, and the person that was driving the open sourcing got laid off. So maybe later. And now brace yourselves. The very worst idea that I have seen, unfortunately with my own eyes and my own hands. Imagine your company's system. And we're talking large companies, so imagine all the components. And I mean all the Redises, a Cassandra, an instance of Oracle, all those application dependencies that you have. And let's put them in a box. And X in a box as in a whole prod environment, logically something that could run and could serve all of your traffic without having to go outside too much, in a single box. Of course, the box has to be powerful. It all started innocent. Because, well, you have all dependencies in one place. It's easy to do integration testing where in a particular software team you can ship a box like that to let's say, an offshore location. It's easy to deploy my stuff because all of the other stuff is in this box already, so I don't have to worry because integration testing against that will be trivial. This is a bit like that. Let's put spaghetti onto a powerful server. If your server is powerful enough, of course it will eat all the spaghetti, you will not see anything in there, you win. But developers being developers, what happens? Well, if you don't look at the ugliness, you forget that it's there, so the spaghetti starts to grow. Well, what do? Of course, you buy a bigger server. That's trivial. But there are more developers still coding. So the spaghetti keeps growing. You buy ultimately the biggest server you can get. And you understand where, imagine this has been happening for a couple of years. This has grown into, I don't even have a picture that would be able to accurately show that. So the results, the attitude that you get if you try to do X in a box is so much space still to consume, because we have this powerful box has so many CPUs, it has so much RAM, so, well, we're only doing 10% of, let's say, overall resource usage, so we can put, our application can grow. You get a dependency spaghetti, because if everything is there available on a single machine, people stop thinking about network latency, people stop thinking about fallbacks, failures. It's so bad. And on my scale of something to 11, this gets a negative infinity. Don't ever do it. If there is one thing that I want you to remember, if somebody's starting to do all your services onto a powerful box just for a minute, no, no. Other things is, of course, disentangling that is just so difficult. It's exactly what you get with a big distributed system, but the moment some people start integrating those boxes into their development work, they start to rely on them. They think that they will get this cozy moment when they can put the one under their desk, just play with other software, well, maybe change some configuration for some other services, and try to use it, and that doesn't work. It's only been a painful experience that unfortunately has happened on this planet at least twice. So there are 2 different organizations that did that, and it's a very, very bad thing. Moving on. Well, Docker cannot return yet because we started playing with that about January. Seriously started to playing with that with a corporate image repository and everything. Docker, it's still under development. There are still quirks. It sometimes breaks a bit, but it turned out that it's great for hacking. People love to play with that. People, if they can play with something like VMs, but without having the costs of VMs, so the startup and ramp-up time and disk consumption, they love it. So we played with that, and we started putting, instead of having VMs for running our Jenkins runners, we started using Docker containers. There was, of course, a caveat here. So Java, Maven, Scala, anybody knows SBT or has heard of SBT? There are 2, I think there are a couple of hands in here. So in here, Java and Maven was easy. We just, try to run a build a couple of times, store all the dependencies, mount that to the container, profit. SBT was a bit more tricky because it takes so much time. So we have baked an image with SBT installed, to which we only then mounted the IV and source directory. This means that we are able to run Scala builds on machines that don't even have Java installed, because Docker, which simplified our CI and which simplified our lives a lot. And you can say, why? Because, dependencies shouldn't change. And I would normally reply, yes, because dependencies don't change. But in this funny internet-driven world that we live in, sometimes internet that people have published do change. And in such cases, it's just easier to be quickly able to regenerate. So once we had our code being run inside Docker, we could go forward. The natural path of going forward was to put all things into container. There are, containers for Cassandra, there are containers for databases, you can link them. Something that we have to keep in mind here while following container all the things approach is not to go into this monster in a box path, because that is sometimes tempting, because those containers are so tiny and pretty. Let's put them on a very powerful machine and let's see what happens. Also, if you don't have to think about something, And you tend to forget about that, and if containers are working just too well, you might forget that. Somebody might ask, can I have, let's say, 40 gigabytes for logs in my container? And normally you would ask, why do you need 40 gigabytes of logs? Why don't you, why do you even log so much? But in the world of containers, somebody will just change the sizes and live with that, and then soon later on you will discover that you might have a problem because your containers are just huge, and it's not good. But so far it's good, it's great. There is a caveat, of course, or a couple of caveats. Some of our developers work on OS X, which means they have to run boot to Docker. Have you heard of boot to Docker? Yay, everybody knows it. I don't have to explain that. Perfect. Which means sometimes you have to configure the boot to Docker as a tool because you have to add certificates and other stuff. That's a bit of a surprise, but we solved it. But the surprise is still there. You're still in for the surprise if you want to do it yourselves. Dependencies. You can Dockerize certain services that you depend on and use them during your build. But remember about the monster spaghetti in a box. Don't try to put all your system into one thing, because that's not the point when you're trying to test. And sometimes OS X is giving you quirks around there. The best solution that I personally love here is just develop on Linux, but I'm not going to convince all the people here, so just mentioning. And the question that you might now want to ask is, well, what happens next? I don't know, because I've heard that we have a new project to work on, but since I'm in here and the work happens in London, I will hear about this new project in details as soon as I get back. So I don't know what happens. Maybe this presentation will get another episodes of bad things that can go with CI, or maybe some slightly better things that can go with CI. But I still prefer building systems rather than building CI, but I thought that you might want to hear my stories. Any questions?
No question.
Okay, if there are no questions, then well, thanks guys for coming. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation and enjoy the rest.